Many of us have been glued to our TVs this fall watching the fictional world of meth use and AMC's Breaking Bad, but our guest today spent a lot of time in the real world of meth. Sergeant Chad Niles is with the New York State Police, and Doug Collyer is an assistant district attorney in Clinton County. The number of meth labs discovered in Clinton County has quadrupled over just the past couple of years.
Yeah,
I think 30.
Yeah,
that have been
in that
discovered.
neighborhood, yes.
That seems like a huge number. Is that a big deal?
Well, when you go from zero to that many in that short a time, it's definitely something that's on the radar.
Before that, there had only been maybe a handful, a couple or two or three a year.
In 2010, we had 3 meth-related arrests, which were all directly related to each other. We actually had 0 in 2011, and then 2012 we had 28 meth-related arrests. So far in 2013, we've had 20.
And how do you explain the jump, the increase?
It's tied to individuals who have moved north, generally from the south, who have the knowledge to make methamphetamine using the clandestine methods. They teach one person, that person teaches 5 people, each one of those 5 people teach 5 more, and now you've got it spreading.
Has it become easier to make it? Is that part of the problem? It's obviously we've heard that you can use common household ingredients that you can find at supermarkets and drugstores.
Yeah, a few years ago, following some federal legislation that mandated the amount of ephedrine or pseudoephedrine that you could get, a new manufacturing process called the one-pot method was kind of put out on the street, which makes it, it's a fairly easy process. It's a very dangerous process, but it's fairly easy. And again, it uses common household chemicals and can be fairly cheap to put together as well.
And what you have now is something that many people addicted to drugs can't make their own drugs, and now you have addicts making their own drugs.
Exactly.
And how do they get a high off of methamphetamine? Is it they can snort it, they can smoke it, they can
it's
inject
basically a super stimulant, so it's sort of similar to cocaine. Very, very euphoric high. Most of them start out by snorting in a crystalline form. Then they usually graduate up to smoking it. They'll put it very similar to crack cocaine. They'll put it in a glass pipe, heat the pipe up and inhale the vapors. And ultimately, just about all of the hardcore addicts wind up mainlining or using hypodermic needles to inject it directly. That's most of the cooks that we've seen involve needles of some sort.
And it's easy to get hooked? It doesn't take much?
Extremely easy to get hooked. Probably the most addictive drug that we're dealing with right now. It's the way it works in the body is different from many other drugs. Cocaine, heroin will give somebody a high and a nice feeling. Methamphetamine will actually permeate into the cells and allow a large amount of dopamine to be released in the brain, which is what causes an individual to be happy. That large amount of dopamine gives someone a high that's far greater than any other drug. What that leads to, however, is that it can lead to brain damage. Unlike the other drugs where you just feel high and then you come down, this, because it's permeating the cells, the large amount of dopamine has its negative effects and can actually damage the brain. There's many other side effects, loss of weight, rotting of teeth, and probably the most dangerous part is the paranoia that comes with it. They can act in dangerous manners and things like that.
And when you talk about the physical dangers, we can see that when you look at those mug shots. There's faces of meth, and when you often compare the mug shots of before and after they've started, you can just see the toll it takes on people.
Terribly physically detrimental, terribly, and in a very short amount of time as well. So I'm sure family members and so forth of addicts can see the change in a short time.
And does it put family members in danger when you have them creating and cooking and smoking a toxic brew like that? Does it put the family in danger as well?
Oh, absolutely. Especially if there's children involved. One, because they're so addicted to the drug, that becomes all their world. It's all that's important to them. Everything else is a secondary concern, including their personal health and well-being, their children's health and well-being. So we see a lot of neglect type issues and so forth. And then, of course, the process itself is super dangerous. So there's this extreme fire hazard, and then there's toxicity of the chemicals, and especially over a long period of time with that kind of exposure. So yeah, there's a lot of concerns with it.
I would say the danger extends not even just to family members, but neighbors as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I'd say at least half of the labs that we've been to have been in multi-unit dwellings so there are neighbors next door that may or may not know that there's a meth lab in the bathroom in the apartment next door. If that goes up, they're explosive, they're flammable. If that goes up, that will take the entire building down. Additionally, you've got these individuals don't care about what they do with the byproducts, which are hazardous chemicals. So they'll just go out, burn them, dump them, things like that. That permeates the groundwater. If you've got a situation where you've got a well, or you're sharing a well with a neighbor, and they're just dumping this stuff into the backyard, it's going to permeate the groundwater and affect that as well.
The fact that this does tend to happen in apartment buildings or areas where there are neighbors nearby, was that one of the main reasons a couple of weeks ago, Sergeant, that you held this presentation where you basically got the word out to people to be on the lookout that these are the ingredients that are used in the meth making process, and to sort of look for these ingredients in large quantities, the battery packs, the used coffee filters, Drano, Coleman fuel, the used cold medicine packets?
Oh, absolutely. One, just for their own personal safety, what's going on around them in those cases. Another, a lot of the manufacturers dump the byproducts or the leftovers in the woods or along roadsides. So seeing as though it's the start of hunting season, there'd be a lot of traffic out in those type of areas to be aware of that, aware of those kind of contents. Don't touch them and report them. And it'll help us also with the background, or that would be indicative of some sort of manufacturing in the area, or someplace around where it's located.
Are the majority of labs that you discover abandoned, or have the remains, the ingredients, containers been dumped, and does that make it hard to track them back to who actually cooked the meth?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably that don't wind up in the DA's office because of that fact alone. It's an abandoned book bag in a ditch with the materials that really can't be traced to anyone, but you still have to have the proper response and proper containment of the materials and proper disposal of the materials. You just can't throw it away in the dumpster. So the hazardous waste company has to come and secure it. So there's a lot that we respond to that don't wind up in prosecutions just for that. But better than somebody stumbling into, because a lot of these, especially the one pot method, even though it's used, it can still present a danger, because usually the lithium is the biggest hazard in that, and that usually it's not all used up in the process, so that has the potential afterwards, even though it's a dead one pot, to ignite.
Speaking of that, we did have at least, I believe, one incident in the city of Plattsburgh where a used one pot was found near a playground, just apparently thrown out the window of a car. And like the sergeant was saying, picking that up and just agitating that bottle again, even though it may seem like it's dead, can restart the process and can re-engage all of the dangers.
So this one pot method, the shake and bake as it's called, basically they use soda bottles, 2-liter soda bottles.
Yeah, most of it, 2-liter soda bottles, Gatorade bottles, really any kind of plastic container. We haven't seen it, but nationwide we've seen it sometimes used in glass bottles, like liquor bottles. That's extremely dangerous because those can't take the pressure. And there's been quite a few deaths of manufacturers, and as a result of that, the pressure explodes the bottle, the shards of glass, and so forth. So not only do you have the fire, but you also have shrapnel. So really, if we encounter a glass one pot, that's a very dangerous situation with us, and we'll probably respond to robot. We won't do hands-on with that at all.
And speaking of responding, what toll does this take on police departments here? having to respond to these meth labs, having to clean them up, which is quite a complicated process.
Yeah, it's kind of a slow and very methodical process. It's basically a hazardous materials incident that involves a crime. Our contaminated crime scene team has different people from different specialties. So we have part of our tactical team or our SORT team. We have bomb technicians, evidence collection specialists, and then road personnel as well. So anytime that we have a response, it takes them out of their role where they would be available for some other response. And these usually take hours.
So they have expertise in hazmat. They get training all the time. So they
Yes.
come in and help police deal with these toxic labs.
Yeah, the police response it's solely a state police response. Everybody in the crime scene team has been trained to the technician level. We train once a month. We have a week-long annual training to meet OSHA requirements. So, it's a mix of different professions within the state police that make up the team.
Doug, has the number of cases jumped dramatically in the past couple of years with the discovery of the labs going up as well?
It has. And often what ends up happening is it's rare for us to have a lab and have only one arrest. Generally, you're talking about multiple arrests off of one lab, which of course is multiple presentments, multiple cases now that we have to deal with from one incident.
And much like the war on drugs in the 70s and 80s, back then the thought was arrest them and put them in prison. Has the thought changed about how to deal with meth addicts? Is the arrest method not the route to go, or how are you dealing with the addicts that you're prosecuting?
It's much more program oriented now. Even the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections has multiple early release programs centered around substance abuse treatment. The difficulty with methamphetamine is its highly addictive nature. When an individual comes off of heroin, for example, for a few days they're going to have flu-like symptoms as they go through detox. With methamphetamine, that is not what happens. They do not have flu-like symptoms. They don't really have a physical manifestation of detoxing. What ends up happening is it's months while the brain attempts to repair itself from all the damage from all the dopamine. What that leads to is a inability to feel pleasure for months. And so while they will not have a physical manifestation of that, it's going to lead to deep, deep depression. The vast majority of users will either commit suicide or will relapse because they need to have that feeling of happiness again. The best way to treat this, probably the best analogy I've heard is trying to get somebody to come back from methamphetamine addiction is like healing a broken arm. The brain will heal itself just like the broken arm will heal itself. What you need to do is put it in a structured environment. With a broken arm, we put it in a cast and we stabilize the arm. With methamphetamine addiction, we need to stabilize the individual, put them in a structured environment. We feel the best way to do that is through the programs with the Department of Corrections for two reasons. One, it's a structured environment. It is a state prison sentence, but it is not a state prison facility feeling. It's more between Willard or the shock camps or the KSAT, the Comprehensive Alcohol and Substance Abuse Treatment Facilities. They're treatment facilities within Department of Corrections. First thing that does is it puts them in a structured environment and it stabilizes the individual. The second thing it does is it removes them from their local problems here. The people, places, and things that they know locally are taken out of their lives because they're taken out of the geographical area, put somewhere else in the state. So they are no longer feeling the pull of people who they used to know, pulling them back into the drug scene. The hope is that once they're released from these facilities, they will be put on parole. So they're not just sent back out on their own. They're given a parole officer. They're given follow-up treatment at local outpatient facilities. So it's been our position that with these types of cases that is the best route to take with these individuals to give them the best chance of recovering from what is a very serious addiction.
Are there prisons here in New York that are specially designed to handle the meth addicts?
Meth specifically, no, but there are special facilities that New York State Department of Corrections has that are specifically geared towards substance abuse treatment.
And are there adequate resources to do that, or is that something that a number of people are looking at and saying this is a growing problem in rural parts of New York, and we need to be able to handle these addicts?
It's a growing problem. What's curious is the closure of 2 shock facilities, at least the closure of one, and the announcement of a closure of a second one that was done just recently. That leaves only 2 shock facilities left in the state, Mariah and Lakeview, which is out west. Those types of programs are what at least our office feels are needed for these individuals. But prison populations are at an all-time low. And that is leading to the closure of not only treatment facilities, but also other facilities as well.
These shock camps like Mariah are the ones that primarily are treating these type of addicts.
That's correct.
And 2 more on the chopping block in other parts of the state?
They have closed, I can't remember if they closed Monticello, I believe it is, or Monterey, and they've closed one other one, or it's announced that it will be closing with the Chateauguay facility coming up, which will only leave the 2.
And does Chateauguay have any?
Chateauguay is, my understanding, a short-term facility for parole violators, not so much a treatment facility.
Yeah. So there is concern among prosecutors that if you're closing prisons, prison population is down, yes, but if you're closing prisons that specialize in treating these type of addicts, that's a problem.
Yeah, it seems to be a mixed message that's being sent.
Along with manufacturing the meth, using the meth, are we seeing related crime? Is this like other drugs where other types of crimes are being committed to either get the money to buy the meth or to steal the ingredients that they need to make the meth?
Absolutely. We're seeing a dramatic increase in pettit larcenies of lithium batteries, Coleman fuel, things like that. These individuals now are getting to a point where they can't afford even to buy what is relatively inexpensive materials to make the methamphetamine, so they're just stealing it.
Stealing from homes or stealing from stores or both?
Mostly stores.
Usually retail outlets.
In fact, we had a case just a few weeks ago at Walmart, I think. There was a case at Walmart a few weeks ago where we had individuals stealing ingredients that were very suspicious and most likely being used for the manufacture of methamphetamine.
We have. And the fortunate thing with that, I guess, is it's very easy for us to track them back to their lab. And then we are able to dismantle the lab and make arrests based on that as well.
Well, speaking of the stores, you're also giving presentations to store clerks and other people to be on the lookout for the type of ingredients that may be bought in large quantities from their stores, to try to maybe tip them off to be on the lookout for people who are coming in to get these ingredients to make meth.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've done a lot of awareness in the last year, 2 years. We've done a lot of awareness presentations to all types, retailers. I have one coming up for state DOT because of the tendency to dump this stuff on the roadside. We've done some with USDA for the housing type issues, and I think we've got one planned coming up here for some of the Clinton County housing assistance and so forth programs. So yeah, the more we can get the word out, there's a lot of utilities. Same thing as when they come to read a meter or something like that, if they see this stuff around.
So they know the warning signs.
Yeah, just to know the materials and so forth.
How much has this paid off? How much has been educating the store clerks, the neighbors, the DOT utility? How much has that paid off as far as providing tips that has helped you bust these labs?
Oh, it's helped a lot. The retailers being on the lookout. That's as we said. That's in the spring that led to at least 4 or 5 labs just from that alone. Loss prevention, contacting. When they see the individual stealing Coleman fuel, it kind of sets the light bulb off that's probably what they're doing. So they get a good description of the suspects. They get a plate number of the car. And that's exactly what happened. The troopers investigating that larceny complaint pull up to the driveway where the car is located, and they're in the middle of a cook. So,
especially if they're buying Coleman fuel when it's not camping season, that's probably
or that kind of quantity,
flag.
Or just stealing it in and of itself is kind of an indicator. That,
It was about 10 years ago that the cold medicines, the allergy medicines, the decongestants were moved behind the counter. You now have a limit of how much you can buy. There's a database that keeps track of that. Has that made a difference, or is that still not having enough of an impact? We know in some states where it's been required that people have a prescription, once again, like it used to be in the 70s in Oregon and Mississippi, that they feel that that's made a dent in the meth manufacturing use there. But what about just putting the Sudafed and the other cold medicines behind the counter? Has that, and keeping track of it, has that made a difference?
Well, at first it did. With the larger manufacturing methods like the red phosphorus and the Nazi method, or Birch method it's called, that involved larger quantities, it had a very, very effective effect. But then with the introduction of the one-pot method, a smaller amount was needed. So we're not really seeing that curtailing the activity, because what they'll have is, well, the slang term for it is Smurfs. They'll have friends, relatives, and so forth go out and purchase the ephedrine or pseudoephedrine for them, and a lot of the addicts will trade it for a finished product. So I bring you a box of Sudafed, you give me a half gram of methamphetamine.
So they can get around it.
So there's circumventing it by not having the same people getting it all the time and so forth. There's quite a network.
And the people that tend to help them out, do they tend to be addicts as well, or are they simply assisting them? And these Smurfs, the slang as you mentioned, are you prosecuting them as well?
Right. Currently, it's not a state law smurfing in and of itself. It is, however, federal law to purchase more than the allotted amount of pseudoephedrine within a 30-day period. We have begun working with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Plattsburgh in taking smurfing cases. And that is probably where we're going to be heading next with these cases. In terms of curtailing that, making a prescription medication would help. Probably wouldn't be the end-all be-all. As we've seen, there's a dramatic abuse of prescription medication as it is. I think the next step that we need is a centralized database for pseudoephedrine purchases. Right now, there's not a centralized database among all pharmacies. Some pharmacies talk to other pharmacies. Some pharmacies only talk to their own companies worth of pharmacies, which also leads to a lot of investigatory time, because we need to cross-reference many different lists when we're looking for somebody to put together. Now, it's not impossible, and we do it all the time, but it would be much easier and curtail this issue a lot easier if every pharmacy was talking to all other pharmacies.
And when you talk about making pseudoephedrine a prescription again, I know there's a lot of pushback on the part of the big pharma industry, and a number of states across the country have been addressing that, trying to do that for a number of years, and I think only Oregon and Mississippi have succeeded in doing that.
So far, I mean, and statistically, the numbers show that say Oregon, for example, when they passed the prescription only, their clandestine laboratory activity dropped by 96%. So it's at least initially seems to be a good way to combat it. There's pushback from the manufacturers because they're selling a lot of product, and there's a lot of legitimate users that it works very well for them. So there's some concern with that, but most of the folks that use it legitimately that I've spoke to say that probably a prescription would be a lot easier, because one, it would be cheaper if they have the health insurance, because it would be a copay situation, and there's basically a lot less hassle to get it, because when they do now, you have to produce ID, you have to sign through the log. It takes 10 minutes to buy the product, so then they can just buy it kind of over the shelf again with a prescription, of course.
So the smurfing isn't illegal unless they exceed their limit that they can buy. If they're not addicts who are trading for meth, are they simply jacking up the price and making a pretty huge profit on the cold medicine?
I've seen individuals that are paid money for doing it. I've seen individuals who are tricked into doing it, saying, I need my boyfriend needs pseudoephedrine for his allergies. My license is burnt right here, so they won't accept it. Can you go do it for me? And the person unknowingly says, sure. So you've got situations like that, but it is becoming a black market of what would otherwise be an over-the-counter, non-prescription drug.
So do you think the past 2 years, when you've had 30 arrests or 30 labs busted, do you think that's a spike, or do you think that this is just going to keep growing and and we're going to see that number continue to go up?
Originally I had hoped to try to envelop it and the individuals involved and kind of rein it back in. As it became more apparent, I'm not sure we're going to be able to successfully do that. I think it's something that's going to be here to stay. It slowly crept across the country from the south and the southwest. I think now that's arrived, it's here to stay. An individual, even if we punish them, will never really forget how to make methamphetamine. If they do, it's readily available on the internet. So anybody who gets out who still has the same addiction, they're going to go right back to it, and many of them do. We were seeing that even with individuals who were arrested, released on bail. They were right back into the game within days. There was one person we got at 3 different labs before we were finally able to get that person sentenced. So it's because of its addictive nature, because of the ease of it, because of its inexpensive nature, it's probably here to stay.
So how do you combat it? What's the best way? Is it trying to get the word out to people to be on the lookout for the remnants or the ingredients used, and hope that those tips can lead to arrest?
Well, it's sort of two-pronged. One is preventive, is that if folks are considering using this recreationally, and I think a lot of people approach it that wind up addicts are like, well, that won't happen to me, or I'll just partying, and I can shake it off after a couple. That's no problem. That doesn't happen with this. It's so powerfully addictive that 1 or 2 recreational uses and you're probably hooked. So that's one prong, is to just tell people you don't want any part of this stuff. You don't want this to be, I think I had said you don't want this nightmare. And for what we've seen for the people that we've taken into custody here, their life is a nightmare. You don't want any part of that. And then, of course, the second prong is being aware of the manufacturing materials and the leftovers and so forth. So we can keep at least keep pace with the situation.
I think at your presentation you said it's 9 times more addictive than cocaine.
I believe that's what the. As a matter of fact, PBS had a very, I think, a Frontline a few years ago, very, very interesting segment on methamphetamine manufacture and addicts, and how it works and so forth. So that's where I get a lot of my statistics, is from that actual Frontline episode. So
a lot of users I've talked to have been shockingly naive about their own addiction of it. I've interviewed one girl who said, I've used methamphetamine probably once a week, every week for 6 months. And I said, wow, okay, that's quite a bit. And she was like, she said, I'm not addicted.
Yeah, there's a lot of denial.
I thought to myself, no, you absolutely are. And she's like, nope, I've quit cold turkey, which I absolutely did not believe. They are shockingly naive about how addicting it is. And my understanding is it does only take as little as 2 uses to become addicted.
Is the district attorney's office having to respond? Are you having to pull in additional resources? Is much of your time now working on meth cases?
A lot of time is put into working on meth cases. I'm yet to have a trial on one. Where we get stuck with it is, a lot of cases we are able to strike deals and avoid grand jury, just get pleas and sentences in county court in a rather expeditious manner. Because of the level of charges revolving from a methamphetamine lab, they generally result in Class A2 felonies. We must go through grand jury. And so what that becomes is a very time-consuming process for us to put each one of these cases through grand jury to move them up to county court. It requires bringing in a lot of witnesses. I have to bring in somebody from CSERT every time, basically as an expert, to explain to the jury, because the jury will look at a picture and say, okay, well, there's some Coleman fuel, there's some batteries, and there's a cold pack. I have all those things in my kitchen. And the expert needs to come in and explain, well, this is why each of these things is dangerous and why this is used in the methamphetamine production. It becomes a very lengthy process. So it becomes very time consuming. For each one of those cases, we have to put through nearly a day full of grand jury.
So is the goal rather to get the plea deals and get them convicted and into treatment, as opposed to having to go to the grand jury and trial and having it drag out and eat up the resources?
Absolutely. I mean, 99% of cases plea out. The methamphetamine cases are really no different. I have a trial scheduled for the end of October that, if it goes forward, would be my first methamphetamine trial. But it's going to be a solid week-long trial of testimony where, I'm going to be bringing in members from CSERT who, some of them are out of SP Malone, some of them are, from all over, overtime and things like that.
Obviously you want the conviction, but at the same time is the priority to try to get the addict treatment behind bars or at these shock camps, as you mentioned.
The priority would be to get them, in Clinton County, every first-time drug offender is offered some kind of treatment in some form, whether it's through probation or whether it's through one of the Department of Corrections facilities. When we see them coming back around the second or third time is when we move towards a more punitive look at the spectrum.
If they don't go to Department of Corrections, are there adequate treatment programs within the community to handle the growing number of meth addicts?
There are. We have a number of OASIS-approved facilities here, and that's the only facilities that we will accept as the DA's office, as a court system, are facilities that have gone through certain qualifications with the state.
As you hold more and more of these presentations, does it raise some eyebrows? Do you hear from the people, hey, you're showing folks how to make meth, you're showing them how to cook meth?
Yeah, at first, years ago, we kind of hesitated with the specifics, but now, like it's inundated on the internet. You can Google search it and come up with recipes and so forth. So it's really not a mystery anymore, or and when I do it, I don't say how much of it, just what the materials are. But really, the best way to be aware of the manufacturing process is to know what goes into the manufacture. So that's really the clearest way to get. So I don't term it a secret. I term it more of a preventative measure.
If folks know the ingredients going into it, they may keep their eyes open. And
exactly right.
You may get the tips if they see it.
Yeah, and it's most of the time it's in a used form. It's not going to be the pristine packaging from the retailer and so forth. It's going to be an opened cold pack or half bottle of Coleman fuel or some unknown liquid in a plastic bottle. So
enough coffee filters to
coffee filters,
a restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. More coffee filters than you would use by yourself in a lifetime. So there's a lot of very if you're looking for it. That's the thing, is that these products tend to just kind of blend into the background unless you're tuned to it. And some people are nervous about, you had mentioned earlier that, I have Coleman fuel, I have drain cleaner. What's the big deal about that? Well, you have to add them up. It's kind of it's very circumstantial altogether. Just by the mere fact of having an ice pack doesn't necessarily mean that you're into methamphetamine. But if they have it with this, and it's open blister packs of pseudoephedrine, and half-filled plastic bottles with some sort of unknown liquid, or plastic bottles with tubes sticking out, you kind of add it all up, and that's more of the indicator than each individual product itself.
Speak to that. I've heard some concerns from people that say, well, I'd like to go camping. I go buy Coleman fuel. You're telling me I'm going to get pulled over on the way home? No. We as law enforcement, we know the people we're dealing with. We know the people we're looking for. So if you're legitimately making these purchases, law enforcement is not going to be investigating you. So put those people's concerns at ease. We know the people we're looking for.
This can be corrosive.
At best, we might ask. If it's a vehicle and traffic stop and you have a couple of cans of Coleman fuel in the back, it might. What do you have that for?
Right.
Oh, I'm going camping. Okay, but there's none of the other products or any of the other indicators there.
Signs,
so no, we won't haul anybody away just for having this particular product or monitor them or in any way.
This can be corrosive to the community. You mentioned that oftentimes it's manufactured in apartments or close to other people, to other neighbors, even in apartments themselves, where if the tenants leave, the remnants of these meth labs can be left behind, and that's a growing concern about some of these chemicals that may be left behind in these units, that then unsuspecting people move in and suddenly are dealing with these chemicals left behind.
Yeah, that's a huge thing in the aftermath. After we basically remediate or collect what we need for evidence, but as far as remediating the whole property, not so much. That's still left, and basically falls on the property owner, whether it be a landlord or whether it be private residents and so forth. And the problem is in New York, there's no real legislative address of this. There's no codes. There's no statutory law that mandates notification of new prospective tenants, or and the same thing in cars. If they're going around in cars and so forth, you sell it to a used car dealer. Who knows what you're getting. So
because you're seeing cases where they'll cook the meth right in the car.
Yep, because it's so portable. It's small, it's portable, and it's fairly easy. Or at least part of that part of the cook is fairly easy to do mobily. So.
The landlords may be unaware and probably would wonder, how do we test for these chemicals anyway? How do I know if it's safe?
Yeah, and that's the thing is not the landlord not being aware of the potential danger there. And the other thing is the cost issue involved. It's a very, very expensive proposition to properly clean up the remnants of methamphetamine manufacture over a long period of time. So that's a big hurdle. Is do landlords want to invest that kind of money to make the place safe? And then where they're dumping it, and environmental concerns of dumping it in the woods, contaminated water wells. I'm sure a lot of this stuff is going down into the septic system. So community as a whole, with any kind of community-based water treatment facilities, it's working its way in there. So there's a lot of, and unfortunately it's not really addressed right now. We're working on it close with the state assembly and so forth to introduce legislation, but it's new frontier, and it's very, very, very confusing and and very complicated. The chemistry involved and so forth. So it takes a while to get through the process.
I would say that the cleanup is what affects the taxpayer as an entity most, not so much the housing of the payment of housing them in prison or putting them through treatment facilities. These cleanups on the low end are going to be $3,500 all the way up to $25,000, if not more. That's a cost that's borne by the taxpayer. We can't make the individual or the offender pay, because you're talking about individuals who just stole lithium batteries because they couldn't afford to buy the batteries. So making them pay for a $25,000 cleanup is just not realistic. So that cost is borne by the taxpayer, because, as the sergeant said, the CSERT comes in and they remediate, collect evidence, secure, and things like that. But correct me if I'm wrong, they're not a hazardous materials hauler. And so a private company is hired and brought in to take the hazardous materials, transport them under federal law or state law for hazardous materials, and then properly dispose of them under federal law. That's a private for-profit company that is now paid by the state and the county to do that.
At a time when the county has little resources as it is, and times are tough and the budgets are tough.
And the state,
suddenly,
at every level of government.
Does the state pick up the majority of the cost, or?
Yep, those are paid for through. It's actually paid for through environmental conservation, through their. The name escapes me, but hazardous materials funding. So, to get the waste hauler, I have to call the spill hotline, get a spill generation number, and then it has to be approved by the hazardous materials folks at environmental conservation to contact the contracted waste hauler, and then they respond and take that. And like I say, it's a for-profit, so. On the low end is probably anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500, depending on how much material you have.
So they do a pretty.
We tried to streamline it as much as possible, but there's some labs that it's just a mess.
So they do a pretty thorough job, but you could still have some of the remnants of the chemicals behind, and that's still the issue, that the people that move in after. Or,
all that we take basically are just the items involved in the manufacture. So if there's carpets in there, couches, furniture, and so forth, bedding, that we don't secure that. So that's left behind essentially. So. And
that's the concern.
left to the property owner to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it is possible for these odors from these labs to permeate into carpets or even the drywall itself. I think I've heard if you want to properly remediate an apartment that has been used for a meth lab long term, you have to strip it to the studs.
And probably not covered by anyone's policy yet in this day and age, or anything like that. So probably the landlords or the owners bear the cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like I say, if you're a landlord, do your homework. Do check your backgrounds of your potential tenants, because you could wind up with some serious bills.
Sergeant Chad Niles, Doug Collyer, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.